Congressman McCaul is the chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. Congressman, welcome back to the Voice of Texas.
Hey, good morning, Chris. Thanks for having me. I was told to call on 8:20, so maybe we're on a different.
No, that's cool, man. We'll bend. We're happy to have you. Okay, look, some things you're working on. I want to get into first off here, and then I want to get into some things that have been on our radar screen on the Voice of Texas. First off, National Defense Authorization Act. This week, you introduced as an amendment or a component to this that would allow some of the defense folks on base to carry concealed firearms for their personal protection. What is the status of this? Are you getting bipartisan support on this? Where do we stand?
Yeah, I anticipate it's going to pass. It's going to be on the House floor today. And the reason, Chris, why I introduced the amendment is in response to the well, first of all, Major Hassan shooting. I went to the Purple Heart ceremony. I was at the funeral services, and that possibly could have been avoided if we could simply let our soldiers on base carry weapons as they do in theater of war. And what the amendment does is the bill allows the commanding officer to basically deputize or appoint who he believes would be appropriate to carry weapons on the base to protect the soldiers. And I'll tell you the other reason why it's so important is that all these threats we're getting recently from ISIS, the threat stream is really ticking up right now. Most of these threats are directed at military installations. And so I think we're on a high state of alert. The military installations, security levels have gone up. And, it just makes common sense to allow our men and women who have served in combat to carry weapons to protect themselves from the threat that could be both inside and outside the military installation.
Yeah, a lot of folks, I think, would agree with you on that. Michael McCaul, Congressman Michael McCaul, my guest right now from the 10th District of Texas. You took a trip to Europe here recently. What was that all about?
Well, I was in the middle. I went to Baghdad and met with the Prime Minister in Baghdad to assess the situation. Didn't walk away very encouraged. I mean, he's inviting the Shia militia in to fight ISIS because the Iraqi National Army is so weak. But that's going to just inflame the Sunni tribes. It's a real complicated situation over there, and I don't think they're going in the right direction. Why is that a problem for us? Because the less ability we have to defeat ISIS over there, the more of a threat it's going to be to the homeland. And then, Chris, we had the honor to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel, who is a very strong opponent of these Iran negotiations on their nuclear warfare program. He really laid out a very strong and compelling case as to why this administration is leading us down a path to nuclear disaster. And so, great takeaway from that. We also looked at in Turkey is kind of like these foreign fighters that travel over to Syria and Iraq and then come back to Europe and then into the United States is a big problem. And Turkey that's a transit route that they take. And we looked at the airport screening that's taking place right now. They're starting to screen better inbound, but their outbound screening is not really where it needs to be. And then we've met some of our European counterparts at NATO talking about how to deal with this threat. And finally, I think one of the most memorable experiences maybe in my lifetime was going to Normandy to commemorate Victory Over Europe Day. My dad was part of the air campaign in World War II for the D-Day invasion, and to see the grave sites laying a wreath in honor of the servicemen and hearing the tats being played was a very emotional experience and one that I'll never forget. And then finally just going to Omaha Beach, the bloodiest battle on D-Day to see it. And those cliffs, not everybody's seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, but those cliffs that they climbed with the German bunkers right on top of them, just remarkable. Well,
that was back in the day when we had an occupier of the Oval Office who actually took national security seriously. I want to talk more about that. Congressman Michael McCaul, my guest from the 10th District here in the great state of Texas. He of course, is the chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. Michael Morell he's pimping a book, and we all know that he is. And there's a lot of distrust of Mr. Morell from both sides of the political aisle, and I understand that because of the way some of the things on Benghazi and such in his testimony before Congress. But he brought up a point about the fact that the Central Intelligence Agency, while Barack Obama, and we just started off the show talking about Mr. Obama's lies. Now it's coming out that he lied about the bin Laden raid, and it's NBC coming out and the New York Times coming out, and of course Seymour Hersh started this whole ball rolling, saying that there were lies told by the administration, and it seems that we have been treated to lie after lie after lie. And what Mr. Morell had talked in an interview with Fox about was another lie, that while Obama was going around the country saying that Al Qaeda was on the road to defeat, that Al Qaeda was decimated, the CIA was briefing him, no, Mr. Obama, it is not defeated, it is not decimated, it is rampaging, it's gathering strength. So what he was being told by the CIA and other intelligence officials was not the message he was delivering to get reelected. Again, my contention is he was reelected on a series of lies. Would you comment on this? Were you seeing the same intelligence that he was seeing? And why didn't we see a more vociferous pushback on this narrative from Republicans saying, wait a minute, that's not the truth at all?
Well, I've been talking about this false narrative for years now, because when he's saying it's on the run right after the killing of bin Laden. And by the way, Morell showed me the photos of bin Laden after he was killed. But I've been talking about this false narrative for years, because he talks about how we've defeated them. They're on the run. The Arab Spring was great democracy. It was really an Arab winter. And at the same time, I'm getting briefings that indicate very much to the contrary, that actually Al-Qaeda is spreading throughout northern Africa. Al-Qaeda in Iraq is metastasizing into what's now known as ISIS. And the threat's getting greater, not lesser. And that was just part of his narrative from the beginning, that he was going to end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and close down Guantanamo. But the problem is it defied reality.
Well,
what he's saying. No, we didn't. Going up into the election, it wasn't as clear. His narrative really spun up in the last couple of years, and it's a lie.
It's so much deeper than this, because now, and I call this the Valerie Jarrett faction that is in the Obama administration, and this is where it becomes dangerous. That heretofore Republicans and Democrats had sections of our government that were off limits to politics, and they all mutually agreed on this. But in the era of Obama, we have seen an infection of the political apparatus that now has its tentacles in every aspect of our government, even the national security component, and it's putting Americans at risk. And I guess what I want to know is, number one, what is the GOP doing to curtail this practice, which, as you and I both understand the ramifications of this, if it's allowed to continue, that we're making national security decisions based on politics, number one. Number two, tell me that folks in the leadership recognize this is going on, because outwardly it doesn't appear they do.
Well, I mean, I recognize it, and I talk about it every chance I get on national television about the false narrative, and how, Morell also talked about how Benghazi crossed the line between national security and politics with the false narrative about the video. I mean, this administration downplays the threat constantly, doesn't want to say the word radical Islamists, because that's not politically correct, and they're so concerned about offending the Muslim world rather than protecting the United States of America. And so I've been very vocal, very loud from the perch that I have as chairman of Homeland Security. We're passing a national defense authorization bill that's very strong. We are putting more money into our military and national security efforts. I was on Fox News yesterday morning talking about how, with this homegrown violent extremist threat, Chris, in the United States, what we saw in Garland, Texas, there's $200 million that the president budgeted within Homeland Security for climate change. And when you look at the line item budget for how are you going to counter this homegrown violent extremism, Islamic extremism, there's zero. That's a real problem. So we're changing the budget to reflect the realities and the needs of our national security that this president just always seems to have his head in the sand.
That's true. Congressman Michael McCaul, my guest right now, the 10th District here in the great state of Texas. I have one more national security question, then I want to move on to President Obama's executive inaction memo. I know you can't go into details about the enhanced interrogation technique program, and I'm not going to ask you for details on this, but Morell, in his interview with Fox, did say that and he talked, this is what Morell said. He said that waterboarding worked. It was a decision only a sitting president can make, and Morell was blown away by the efficacy of waterboarding. And he also laid down this, and this goes back to the infiltration of politics into national security concerns, that when he was talking to members of Congress, both political parties, and laying out the EIT program, he was not only did he get support from Democrats, but he got Democrats, along with Republicans, admittedly, that said, "Why aren't you doing more?" And then he decried that travesty of a Senate report that basically the Democrats had to say, "Hey, it wasn't us. We weren't there. We weren't in this decision-making process," when nothing could have been further from the truth. Would you address your comrades across the aisle there on the Democrat side who are now trying to say they had nothing to do with this enhanced interrogation technique program?
Well, it's so frustrating, the lies. Guess who else was on the Intelligence Committee at the time? Nancy Pelosi.
Pelosi.
Listen, anybody on the Intelligence Committee or my committee knew exactly what was going on, both Republican and Democrat. And in the wake of 9/11, you have to understand the mood of the country was to win at all costs. And you know what? It was done in very limited, narrow circumstances. And I'll tell you this, Chris, it worked, and it saved American lives. There were multiple plots, major plots, that were stopped because of these enhanced interrogations. And, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, 9/11 was not the only plot that he had on the books. And we were able to stop. People ask me, God, how have we stopped all this from happening? How have we been able to keep America safe? Well, it's because we've had good intelligence, good law enforcement, and these techniques gave us great intelligence to protect Americans. And you know what? I'll stand by that decision. I think it was the right thing to do.
All right. Last thing I want to talk to you about, by the way, Congressman Michael McCaul, my guest right now from the 10th District here in Texas. He, of course, is the chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. You signed on to an amicus brief challenging President Obama's unconstitutional executive inaction memo. And just so you know some background on this, Congressman, I don't think I talked to you about this the last time we had you on. That's how I classify what he did, because you and I both know he didn't put pen to paper and make it an actual executive memo, or an executive order, rather, because that's subject to judicial review, and he couldn't have his executive order subject to review. So he just whispered in Jay Johnson's ear, and Jay Johnson dutifully saluted and instituted this. By the way, and I'll throw this in as a side, the Washington Times and other outlets doing reporting that DHS is continuing to, even despite the injunction here in Texas on this memo of his, they are continuing to process amnesty applications for these illegal immigrants. Number one, what is Congress going to do about the Department of Homeland Security violating a judge's order, number one? And number two, tell us about the amicus brief.
Well, I joined 112 of my fellow Republicans, and I'm also a member of the Supreme Court Bar, to sign on to this important lawsuit to stop his executive amnesty. And, he said himself 22 times he didn't have the authority to act alone. I think everybody that's taken a government course or Constitution 101 knows that it's the Congress that writes laws, not the executive branch. The executive branch enforces the laws. He's creating law. He is circumventing the Congress, and quite frankly, he's violating the Constitution. And it's as simple as that, Chris. And that's the issue that I'm confident. Look, the district court judge, Ana, did a great job in his decision. He also found that the Justice Department was, nearing contempt, and I believe the Fifth Circuit, very conservative circuit appellate court, will uphold this ruling. And then, of course, Judge Scalia is the go-between between the Fifth Circuit and the Supreme Court. And so I believe this executive action has been halted. If there is evidence that the administration is violating this order, and I have any evidence of that, then we will petition the court directly to enforce that.
Yeah, tell your staff.
That would be a violation. That would be a contempt of the court's order if, in fact, that is happening. Of course, we've been told that it's been stopped.
Yeah.
But after this phone call, one of the first calls I'll make is to find out what's going on down there.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was in the Washington Times, I believe. It was reporting that the DHS attorney admitted that I think it was some 2,000 amnesty applications were processed after the judge's order came down, and that I guess a lot of the listeners here to the Voice of Texas should want to know who's going to bring Jay Johnson and his people to account for violating the judge's order. Congressman Michael McCaul, from the 10th District of the great state of Texas here. Congressman, always appreciate you setting aside time to talk about the issues with us, and come back again soon, okay?
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. I sure do appreciate it.
You betcha, sir.